Certainly, and agreed that pick up on the theme just there that my boss, the CEO, accuses me of always pointing out we're at a pivot point, and I've been doing it for 9 years, and we usually are at some point. But particularly Fitch as a business is a financial information business, predominantly a rating agency. It's not a financial transaction business. The big data, machine learning, whatever you want to say, either frame it, everyone's been telling us for a long time, well, sooner or later, you're going to be disintermediated. You'll have your Spotify moment. You won't need people anymore. The models will just produce everything. Mm-hmm. And you can't be complacent about that. But what is produced, usually at a faster pace, is data, but not real information, if you take the literal meaning. So the opportunity is, for any business, is trying to develop the insight that people need around that data. The more information and data there is, the more people want the value add and the relevant insight, and the more they need people to sort of provide that to them. And at the moment, people are still the customers. If you're a fund manager, if you're trying to sort of manage your risk, it's still a human on the other side of the transaction. So we as a business, the challenge for us has been is expanding through acquisition as well as growth. The sheer sort of rise in value of financial information businesses within the sector, the crazy multiples that people are paying, it is redolent of the sort of dot-com boom of the late 90s and the early noughties. Now, some of them will be misvalued. Those opportunities won't materialize. But I guess my perspective on that comes from our involvement in both, in trying to buy these companies and trying to integrate these companies, some of which are large, some of which are small. There's clearly a demand for a form of insight and relevant analysis to do, for the financial services sector with all the data that's available. That's not really being cracked by anyone, although I could name a few companies that have really seem to have made great inroads, like IHS Markit, for example. And that leads us to, I think that's the opportunity. From a talent and L&D point of view, it's changed the way, in the last 10 years, at Fitch at least, people would work. So the entire resourcing of our business is shifting about better supporting a proportionally smaller group of agile analysts. Instead of having analysts do a lot of their own processing to support their own analytics, we've got to take that away from them because they've got to react faster and provide more insight, because what people are buying from us is that product. They're not buying the processing that leads to our own insight. They want a quick piece of information, piece of analysis, and we've got to enable people to provide that quickly. So our investment has been more around that.
If you look at the way that the world is moving, I think consumerism, insight, data, and visibility are creating value opportunities in every part of the value chain of financial services. So whether that at the front end is on advice, either through IFAs in the UK or private bankers, whether it's in the development and deployment of investment solutions for the fund management community, whether it's in risk analytics for mortgages and lending and other capabilities, and whether it's in the ability to attract best execution in brokerage markets. There's tons of places where technology is transforming the value chain for the commercial owners of enterprises. And of course, the focus of shareholders, which the majority of firms in the sector are there to deliver to, are looking at economically value-adding change rather than cultural and behavioural value-added change. On the flip side, though, and again, reflecting on SIP's presentation, the behavioural change of individuals, particularly the younger generation, but not exclusively, is enabling value opportunities to engage and retain talent. And again, not criticising subsidisation, because I thought it was great, is the insight that you can get as to why people move employer. So what have they achieved in other organisations? How are they adapting to technology? How are they adapting to change? Are the real key data insights which offer the opportunity for employers to retain the right people and to lose the not right people.
The convergence of the demands of the workforce to find fulfillment and development, professional development, and not just thinking about it within their careers, but also recognizing that, if we come back to data, in the rest of their lives, there's lots change and lots is changing. I think it was interesting, one of the commentary that I had was, again, it comes back to the 75% of the workforce is millennial. They are actually asking to be tracked. They're asking, why can't we see our performance valued? Not purely, I'm not going to track myself purely by my salary. I want to see how I'm improving. And there was a correlation to say, well, if you're in another industry where you've elite performers, let's take the elite sports world. They're constantly looking at data to see how they can be better. And yet in our world, we're very binary. It's either you get paid more and get promoted, or that's it.
Yep.
But actually, there's a lot more about your professional talent. You may just not be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
You might not have the right talents right now, but you can be. And so there's a lot of loss and wastage. So I think that's where we're sitting at now, is a greater sense of awareness that our workforce wants to drive through change, wants to change the businesses that they work in. Technology is there to support them, and tracking is also part of that, and there's not a resistance to that. It's help me be better through the data. Now, I might be painting a very rosy picture, to take Phil's point. We've been here before. But again, as an entrepreneur, big institutions will always just spend most of their time going, why? Entrepreneurs go, why not? Yeah? And that's the disruptors will sit back and go, let's get on with it. Let's start doing it. And I have a better sense from the interviews I had now and looking at the industry at large, where people are saying, we've got to adjust. This is 2018, 2019. This is if we don't, yes, we'll go down the route of robotic delivery of financial services, which is clearly not what we need or want. We want something a bit more advanced than that.
The whole thing about data is, I always worry about the illusion of false precision. In other words, that we spend a lot of time thinking we've got information, trying to create metrics and all of this sort of stuff, but actually doesn't measure the right things. So it's not that we shouldn't measure the right things, but I think good judgment is ultimately where the starting point, and the analytics and the technology, I saw you flinch there. The good technology, good information informs that judgment, and I think that's where we need to start. So I try to avoid, it's like with the whole ROI debate around learning. I've seen so many attempts to try to crystallize this, and frankly, they just don't seem to work. So we might get onto this, but if you embed if the people who are the learners, the ones who want to evolve and develop, if they are invested in evaluating, is there going to be a payoff here? That they're responsible for that payoff. That for me is the starting point. I don't want to get into science projects trying to prove the ROI of something if outside of the people who are there evaluating. And it perhaps comes down to how the philosophy about how learning really adds value to the business. I think in that, talking about the DNA and talking about agility and things like that, it made me think. I used to work for NatWest Group. I was head of executive development. And they, prior to, most of you probably, maybe you're aware, they were bought in a hostile acquisition by Royal Bank of Scotland, having underperformed the market for 10 years. In that preceding period, the CEO went through a deliberate exercise of bringing in fresh talent at the top of the organization. So the top 20 jobs in the 3 years prior to it falling had been replaced, the 5 years prior to it falling, had been replaced by external hires from outside of the industry. So people came in, the marketing guy was from Unilever, there was a technology guy, and so on and so forth. And it was a disaster. Now, why was it a disaster? Well, fundamentally, I think what it comes down to is when you look at the top of any organization that's going to be capable of adapting and being flexible, there needs to be trust among the top team. People need to know. Trust is built on knowledge, on relationships, on knowing one another, and having the ability to be able to disagree and figure out how to move things forward. And that was something that was just not addressed. So I think that there is merit in looking elsewhere to bring in, but they often, if you don't then think about how do you build high-performing teams, what are the ingredients? I think you talked a bit about it in the research, in the presentation, but that for me is where you start. What do we need from high-performing teams in the leadership group? And then you get into, okay, do they know what they're doing? Do we have clarity of direction and all of those sort of things? But what's the level of trust among the members of that team? Because if we don't get that right, then no amount of metrics or investments are going to work. Because the pace of change, and this is where technology has really moved things, the pace of change means you are being buffeted all over the place. So you have to be able to work effectively together, and working effectively is about how can you disagree, how can you problem solve, and all of that sort of stuff.